All right. So what we have on the agenda for today is that we are going to continue talking about PowerPoint and creating presentations using PowerPoint. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to cover the material that's in chapter 1 of the PowerPoint book. So chapters 2 and 3, we are not going to be using the book at all. Chapter 1 we are, but chapters 2 and 3 for next week, we are going to take the material that is covered in it, but instead we're going to do the Thanksgiving turkey dinner version of that. So I've created a better way of explaining the concepts that you need to know how to do that are covered in chapters 2 and 3, and we're going to do it. We're going to do it together in class next week. So that'll be the stuff on chapters 2 and 3. The other thing is that our final presentations will start again next week. So if you haven't yet signed up for the time that you want to do your presentations, you want to go and fill out or put in your name on the spreadsheet on the presentation website, and send me your presentations ahead of time and I'll take a look at them. I know that a couple of you have already sent them to me, and I will be giving you some feedback later on this week or early next week with what you sent me. Questions about that? Are there any questions that people have about the presentation that we're doing for the final presentation? Okay. So what we're doing today is we are going to be doing, like I said, chapter 1. And so in order to do chapter 1, the first thing that you need to make sure that you have is that you, you need to log in correctly. Is that you need to download the pictures that we are going to be using, because so again, if I scroll down in here, today we are at class 13, which is December the 5, and then next week we'll be at class 14, and the week after that we'll be at class 15, and that'll be the end. So what we are doing tonight is, if I go into assignments, and in assignments, if I go into the presentations unit, and I go into presentations class 1 part 1, these are the pictures that we're going to be using in class. So I'm going to download this picture and save it. And I'm going to download this picture and I'm going to save it. I'm going to download this picture and I'm going to save it. And I'm going to download this picture and I'm going to save it. And I'm going to download this picture and I'm going to save it. And I've saved them all onto my desktop, so that's where I'm going to save my files. The other way of doing it is the way that the book tells you how to do it, which is to go onto the internet and search and find it. But we'll talk about that and why you don't really want to do that in a little bit. Yes. Presentations class 1 part 1. So in assignments, in presentations, it is presentations class 1 part 1. And in presentations class 1 part 1, this is the assignment that we're doing today. And so the pictures that you're going to want to use are these pictures, because those are the pictures that are going to be in that the PowerPoint chapter 1 is going to require. And in fact, if you turn to page 3 of the assignment, or I mean 3 of the book, it has what it looks like, what it's going to look like. So we're going to be creating a title slide with a photo. We're going to create on slide 2 a multi-level bulleted list with a photo. Slide 3 is going to be just the title and the illustration. And then slide 4 is going to be a comparison layout and the photo. And then slide 5 is going to be the concluding slide. And so that's the assignment that we're going to be building in class right now. Yes. If you click it, well, yeah, if you click it and it brings it up, then that means that that you're loading it. So then you have to, well, it depends on what browser you're using. So I'm using Chrome in this case. So it depends on what browser you're using. If you're using Firefox, for example, then it'll work slightly differently in order to get to it. So if I'm in Firefox and I go to Canvas,
what's that guy's name right there on the left, on the front?
I'm sorry.
That actor.
I don't know. And when I log in, then I go into my class. So in we are in Microsoft Office. And in Microsoft Office, if I go into assignments, and when I go into assignments, if I show by type, and I change it to presentations, class 1, part 1. And then here are all of the pictures. So I can click onto it and it'll say, what do I want to do with it? And I click on to save file. And when I click on to save file, I click on to save, and it will then save it. And it will save it into my downloads, because by default, it'll save into the downloads. So if I say save, it will then save it into the downloads. Yes?
I have a question regarding the
Okay, what question do you have about the quizzes?
The quizzes that has the short answers, it gives us the option to retake it. Even though you have already graded, can we retake it again?
Yes. So the assignment quizzes you can retake, but the midterms you cannot.
Yeah, I mean the quizzes that has short answers, not the multiple choice.
Well, I mean, the midterms also sometimes have short answers and sometimes have multiple choices. So under assignments, there are for example, in presentations, there is a part 1, class 1, part 2 is going to be a quiz that you are allowed to retake. So if it says allowed attempts unlimited, it means you can retake it. If it does not say allowed attempts unlimited, it means you are not allowed to retake it. Yeah. All right, so in PowerPoint, what we want to do is, the first thing that we want to do is we want to open up PowerPoint. And when you open up PowerPoint, almost never is it a good idea to use one of the existing themes and variants. The only reason that you should use an existing theme or variant is if you are actually being asked to do so. And the reason that I say that is that most of the themes violate the rules that I was talking about in bad PowerPointing. So one of the problems that I have with, for example, integral is that it's got too much pictures on it. And so it's too busy. The problem that I have with slice and basis, and for that matter, facet, is that it's too light on, you know, the content, the light text with light background. So the problem really that I have with most of the themes is that most of them are things that you really don't want to do. But that said, the book wants us to use ion, so we'll go ahead and use ion. And I will point out where things are not great about using the ion theme. So we're going to use the ion theme, but they don't want us to use the green ion theme. They want us to use the blue ion theme. So we're going to click on to the blue. And then we're going to click on create. So this again is on page 6 of the assignment. And on page 7, what they want us to do is they want us to create a title slide. So in order to create the title slide, the title that they want us to use is the title Healthy Hydration. This is on page 8. So we want to type in and say Healthy Hydration. There we go. Healthy hydration. And then the subtitle for it is supposed to be drinking water while exercising. And you'll notice that if you look on page 9, it's capital letter D, capital letter W, capital letter W, capital letter E, and everything else is lowercase. However, you'll notice that when I am typing it, it's going to look like I'm using all caps. I am not using all caps. So if you try to copy it exactly as how it looks on my screen, you will not be doing it correctly. And you will notice that it's not correct because later on, we're going to be actually changing the theme. And so this will end up causing problems if you don't do it the way that, that you're supposed to be typing it. So you'll notice that on page 9, step number 2, it says, why does the text display with capital letters despite the fact that I'm typing with uppercase and lowercase letters? And that's because that's what the ion theme actually does. So we wanted to say drinking water while exercising. And again, you want capital D, capital W, capital W, capital E, and everything else is lowercase. All right. The next thing they want us to do is they want us to make drinking water while exercising. They want this to be in italics. So to make it in italics, we want to click on the I button, or again, you can do the keyboard shortcut with the control I. Just like you can do it in Microsoft Word, you can do it. Works the same in PowerPoint. One of the things that is important to know is that on the bottom of page 10, it says a point is 1/72 of an inch. So a character with a font size 36 is 36 out of 72, which is 1/2 of an inch in height. So this might be on one of the quizzes. Just saying, you might want to remember that. Perhaps. So they want us to increase the font size. It's currently size 20, and they want this to become size 32. So to make it go to 32, there are lots of ways that you can do it. One way is you can use the increase, decrease font size button. Another way to do it is you can click onto the drop-down menu and choose 32. Another way you can do it is you can actually just type it in. So where it says, where it has the size, you can actually change the size. Whatever way you want to make it become size 32 is not significant, but they do want it to be size 32. The other thing is that they want the word water to be blue. So to make the water to be blue, we want to double click on a water, and then on the colors, they want the color to be dark blue. So it'll be drinking water while exercising. And the file name that we want to save this as is going to be last name, first name, healthy hydration. So I'm going to save this. And when I save this, I want to save this on my computer, and I want to save it in my documents, and I want to save it in the folder that I have. Let's see, where did I save that? I thought that was in my Mark Random's totally awesome, way cool stuff. I want to call this the healthy hydration, and that is where I'm going to save my assignment. So healthy hydration. Questions so far? Yeah. It would be best if you did, so that when we are grading it, it'll be easier to grade. But if you don't, it'll end up being fine. But it would be nice if you did that. All right, so we're on page, we are on page 15 is where we're at. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to insert a new slide. And there are lots of ways to create a new slide in PowerPoint. One of the ways to create a new slide in PowerPoint is on the home, you can click on the button that says new slide. Another way to do it is you can do the keyboard shortcut, which is Control M. The reason it's Control M and not Control N is because Control N is to create a new document. So to create a new PowerPoint is Control N. To create a new slide, it's Control M. Or on a Mac, Command M to create a new slide.
It's just closing it when I do that. Yeah, I close it.
If you do the control of the Command M,
On the Mac, it's closing it.
you're right. It is, let me think. To insert a new slide, it is Command Shift N on the Mac. So it's Command Shift N to create a new slide. N is in new, yeah, on the Mac, yeah. All right. So we want to create a new slide, and the new slide that we want to create is going to be a title and content slide, which is the default. So again, one of the ways that you can do it is you can just do Control M, or you can do new slide and then title and content. whatever way you want to do to create the new slide, we create the new slide. And the title of the new slide is going to be water, your essential nutrient. And the first bullet point is going to be on page 18. It is going to be cushions and protects vital organs. The second level bullet point is going to be transports nutrients and oxygen to cells. And there are two ways that you can get the second level. One way is you can hit your tab on your keyboard in order to tab it into the next level. The other way is to use the increase or decrease to increase or decrease the list level. So you can either use this, or you can, on your keyboard, you can press tab. If you do the tab method, it tabs it over. Shift tab does the reverse. So the keyboard method of increasing is to hit tab. To decrease, it's shift tab. Or again, you can use the increase decrease list level button that will do the same thing. The next bit of information that we want to have is we want it to be in the first level, and we want this to say regulates body temperature. And then the sub of that is going to be dehydrated body cannot cool itself. And then the sub of that is can cause muscle fatigue and heat stroke. So again, the text is on page 20. Yes.
What do you have to do to remove the tab?
So you can either use the decrease list level in order to remove the, to decrease the list level, or the keyboard shortcut is shift and then tab. So shift tab decreases, tab increases, or again, you can use the button. depending on whether you're increasing or decreasing. All right, the next thing is on page 21, and they want us to select the words cannot cool itself. So I'm going to select the words cannot cool itself. And again, the way that you select it is you can click and drag, or again, you can double click to select a word, and then double click and then drag to go from that word. And once you've selected cannot cool itself, we want to make this bold. So to make it bold, you can either click the B button, Control/Command B, makes it bold. Or you could, again, click this button here. Another thing they want us to do is they want us to increase the font size from size 18 to size 20. So we can use the increase font size button to make it become size 20. Or we can click on the drop-down menu to make it size 20. Lots of different ways to make it become size 20. Any question about slide number 2? All right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to create a new slide. So to create the new slide, again, you could click on the slide, create the new slide button. You could do Control M, or on a Mac again, Command Shift N. Or if you click onto the drop-down menu, then you can create what is called just a title-only slide.
Can you save this one or not?
Yes.
One that you can
Yes.
save.
Hitting Control S, you can hit save. If you created the slide by creating a new slide by doing either the Control M or the Control Shift M, or by clicking the new slide, then what you'll want to do is in slides, you'll want to click onto layout, and in layout, you'll want to change it to title only. Because for this slide, we wanted to only have a title. And in the title, we wanted to say, begin workout with plenty of water. And that's the only thing that we want to be on this slide. The next thing we want to do is create another new slide. And in this new slide, we want this to be a comparison slide. And what a comparison slide is it is a slide that has two content pieces, but unlike the layout called to content, a comparison slide has two content and a title at the top of each content piece. So for the overall title, we wanted to say, and this is on page 25, we wanted to say, keep replenishing fluid levels. And then the title of the left-hand side is going to be while exercising, and then a colon, and then a enter. And we want 10 ounces every 20 minutes. And then the right-hand side is going to say after exercising, and then a colon, and then an enter, And then we want 8 ounces within 30 minutes. All right, so now that we have our stuff done the way that the book wants it to be done at this point, the book realized that they wanted to change it from being this theme to being the facet theme. So they want us to change this to the facet theme. And so to do this, we're going to change our theme. To change the theme, it's found on the Design tab. So you want to click onto the Design tab. And then in the Design tab, they want us to change it to the Facet theme, which is this theme right here. But they don't want it to be green. And instead, they wanted it to be blue. If you don't, okay. Now, the problem that I have with this is that I actually think the faucet theme is a better theme than the ion theme was, but I have a problem with this theme as well, and that is that the color blue on this is too light against the white background. But that's all right. It's the theme that the book wants us to do, so it's the theme that we're going to do. But in real life, I would not choose this theme. Yes? Absolutely. And the way that I would do this in real life, so you do not have to do what I'm about to show you for this assignment. However, in real life, if you wanted to make this a better looking theme, where is it? In design, no, in view, if I go into the master view, so I go into the slide master view, I can then go into colors, and in colors, I can go into customize colors. And in customize colors, where we have our hyperlink and our accents, and they are currently at turquoise, I could choose like dark blue. And if I chose dark blue and hit save, then it would have changed it to dark blue. And dark blue is a lot better than this. And that's where you would change it, is by changing the colors. But again, the book wants us to do this, so we'll use this. All right. We have those. So I think we're pretty close to done with this presentation. So we've got on slide 1, we have this. And on slide 2, we have this. And on slide 3, we have this. And we have slide 4, we have this. The problem is that we don't have pictures. And as I mentioned in my bad PowerPointing, on every slide, you should have pictures. You should have imagery for your audience. So one of the ways to insert a picture is on insert, you can go down to where it says online pictures and insert an online picture. You can insert a screenshot, which is why I had you learn how to do that when we were doing in Access, was to show you how to create screenshots. The reason I wanted you to know how to do screenshots is less because I think you're going to use them when you're using that, and more likely that you'll use it when you're using either PowerPoint or in Microsoft Word. But the problem with using online pictures is, first of all, if you look on page 31 and you try to do online pictures, you'll notice that on page 31, it looks like there's a thingy that was called office.com clip art. Where is the office.com clip art, you ask? Well, Microsoft decided back in 2013 to disable and to get rid of the clip art, literally a week after this book was published. So you can't use the office.com clip art because it doesn't exist anymore. You can still use the Bing image search, and you can search and look for the pictures just like it's telling you to do. But I've actually downloaded them for you. And that's why you can use the download, because I got them for you. But if you want to search and find them, you're welcome to do so. The problem, again, with using somebody else's pictures is that they are somebody else's pictures. And so you need to make sure that you have permission to use those pictures. And if you use somebody else's pictures, you should really credit them, even if they don't require you to credit them. For this, you don't have to do that because, well, because the book gave it to us, so we don't have to do that. And so instead of taking it from here, I'm going to take it from where I saved it, which was I saved it on my desktop. So I'm going to go on Insert, I'm going to go to Pictures, and I'm going to go to my desktop. And when I go on to my desktop, I have all of the pictures. So the first picture that I want to do is the healthy hydration picture. And there, whoops, not this one, not the water bottle. I meant to do pictures. It was the lady with the healthy hydration one. So it's this picture is the one that we want. And right at the moment, we're just putting it any place. It doesn't matter where we put it. We just need to put it someplace. The second picture is going to be on slide number 2. And on slide number 2, this picture that we want is the healthy hydration 2 picture. And slide number 3, we want to insert the healthy hydration 3 picture. And then on number 4, we want this picture to be the lady, and this picture we want the man. There we go. So those are the pictures that we want. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to make them look better. So in order to make them look better, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go on slide number 1, and we're going to move this picture over here to the side. And one of the things that I want to point out to you is that when you select a picture, several things happen. Thing number 1 that happens is that instead of being in the regular Home tab, we are in the Picture Tools tab. And the Picture Tools allows us to manipulate the picture. And we're going to play around with this picture, with the pictures a lot next week when we do the turkey dinner. But there are a couple of things that I'm going to do with this today. So the first thing is that I want to resize this picture. And I want to point out to you a couple of things about resizing. I know I mentioned this when we did Microsoft Word, but I want to point it out again when we do PowerPoint. So if you are playing around with it, I want you to stop for a moment and I want you to look up on my screen because I'm going to show you what not to do. Okay? So the first thing is that you can resize by manipulating, by moving it in the middle. If you do that, you will mess it up because it'll make things way skinnier or way bigger than what they should be. Similarly, you should not do it in the middle for the height, either going bigger or smaller, because it stretches the picture out of what it should be. Instead, what you want to do is you want to go on the corner. And when you go on the corner, it resizes it based on both the height and the width. Now, the problem with this particular one is that there's a lot of empty space here that I don't want. There's a lot of empty space here. So I can actually just click and drag it out, and that's fine. But the problem with doing that is that the content is still there, which means that it's going to take up more disk space, which means that when I save it and I send it to my boss or my teacher or whatever, it's going to take up more disk space and they'll probably be mad at me and all that kind of stuff. So there's a better way of manipulating the picture to get rid of the stuff that I don't want. And the better way is to use the crop. And to use the crop, I'll move it back out to here so I can more easily show you the crop, is that I have to select the picture first. After I've selected the picture, in Picture Tools format, in size, there is the crop button. And if I click onto that crop button, it creates then the crop handles. And the crop handles then can be used to crop. And in this case, I want to crop it so that the photo search doesn't show up. So I want to crop it from the bottom and crop out the photo search stuff. And I want to crop out from the left up to just before her arm, like maybe to there. And in order to accept this crop, I then click to the side. And that will then crop that picture. And now that I've cropped that picture, I can move it to where I want her to be. And it looks like I want to crop her a little bit more. So I could either crop her a little bit more from the left, but I think I want to actually crop her from the right. So I'm going to crop, and I'm going to crop her a little bit from the right to maybe like about to there. So now I've cropped that picture. And the reason that that's a better way of doing it than just resizing and moving it out of the way is that this has actually changed the picture itself. And so it's going to take up less disk space. And if I really cared about disk space, there's a button on here that says compress pictures. And if I choose compress pictures, it will, I can choose to apply only to this picture, or I could have it apply to all of the pictures, but in this case, I'll just choose to apply it to just this picture, and it will delete the cropped areas of the pictures. And what this will do is this will then get rid of all of those pieces, and it'll mean that this will take up less disk space. Now, the problem with doing that is that it means that this is no longer as high of a quality picture as it was before I did that, which is probably fine for a presentation, but may not be fine if I wanted to print it. Because monitors, like your, like the projector or like the monitor that you're using, if you're on a Windows machine, it has a maximum resolution of 92 pixels per inch. If you're on a Mac, it's 72 pixels per inch. Your printer, really crummy draft level, is 150 pixels per inch. So that means that what looks great on screen probably is not going to look great when printed. Now, if you don't care, because in this case, quite frankly, I don't care, because this is a silly, healthy hydration thing that I'm, for class that really doesn't, it's not for, the content for the class, it's not important, then it's not important. But if it is important, then you probably don't want to reduce the quality of the picture. Or perhaps you might want to have two versions. One version that is for screen and one version that is for print. Question?
You know how after you're inserting the picture, they give you the design ideas. Can you pick any of the style from there?
Absolutely. So we'll talk more about the style choices next week when we're doing it. But when you're in your format, all of these picture styles can be applied to any picture. And generally, I think in most cases, you want to apply those styles.
So that it looks proportional.
Right. Well, and also so that it looks cooler than, without doing it. But for this assignment, we just want it to look kind of like this. All right, so the next one is slide number 2.
But if I use it, you're not going to dock points.
No. Slide number 2, we want to make the water bottle be on the right-hand side. And again, the problem with it being on the right-hand side is that it's not going to fit. So what the book is telling you to do is the book is telling you to change, to actually manipulate it like this. But I think that's a terrible idea. You should never, ever do that. I think the book is wrong. In fact, I would argue the book is not only wrong, the book is really wrong. And unless you have a good artistic reason for manipulating the picture should not be manipulated in that way. So instead, the better thing I think to do on this is to crop it. So again, I'm going to crop from the left so that I've got mostly the bottle, and then crop from the right. So I have mostly the bottle, but maybe just a little bit of extra space, something like that. And when I do that, well, now it fits and it looks like it originally did, which is the better way of doing it. So why did the book tell you to, I don't know. I think the book is wrong. All right, so now I've got my water, the essential nutrient, done. The next one is we've got cute little, emoji dude drinking the water. The problem with cute little emoji dude drinking the water is that he's taking up way too much space. So I want to make him smaller. So I'm going to make him smaller so that it fits better. And one of the things that I will point out to you is this. So if I make him a little bit smaller, and then I click and drag, notice that these guidelines appear. These guidelines will tell you when you are centered or when you are placing it in a pretty decent spot, and so on. So the middle dot like this, dotted line like this, means that I've made it centered. And if I drag it down a little bit more, somewhere in here, it will tell me that I made it centered and centered. There we go, centered and centered. So now that I've done that, it's reasonably close to being pretty cool. So one thing you may have noticed is that this has a bunch of little transparent symbols on it. So if I want to get rid of those, I can, in my picture tools, in my color, you may remember there was a thing called set transparent color. And if you click on a set transparent color, and then you find one of those gray dots, it'll make then all of the gray dots become transparent. You may recall we did that with the letterhead, and we made the book on the letterhead, some of the color on the book on the letterhead, we made it go away. Same thing. So that now, if I look at my slide deck, I have on this one, I've got healthy hydration. On this one, I've got the water, my essential nutrient. On this one, I've got begin workout with plenty of water. And then on this one, it's not even. So I would want this to be even. So to make this even, I need to change the picture so that this picture and this picture are the same. So if I look at the format on it, I can see that this picture is 2.73 inches tall by 3.41 inches wide, and this one is 3.62 tall by 3.62 wide. So the first thing I would do is I would decide which one I want to crop. So which one do you think would be the better one to crop? First one.
First one,
Why?
that's a large one.
Because it's larger.
Smaller than.
Right. The problem with cropping, with resizing it for this one is that I would either need to have, the letterbox effect where you have black on the top and black on the bottom, or I would need to stretch it so it would be distorted, or I would need to make it bigger and then crop it. Those are all possible possibilities. So I could either resize this guy to make him be the same size, like that, or I could crop her and make her be the same size as him. If I go this route, he's now way too big going to the right by, almost an entire inch. So I need to get rid of about an inch off of him, in which case I would crop him and maybe take off an inch off of this side. So maybe like about that much. What is he now? 4.1, not enough. Crop him some more. 385, not quite enough. 365, that's probably close enough. And then I need to resize him or move him back so that he fits where he's supposed to go. And move her so that she matches. So it really doesn't matter how you make the match. You just need to make the match. One of the problems that I see on PowerPoint slides is if you have more than one picture, unless there is a really, really, really good artistic reason, they should be the same size. And you can either make them be the same size by cropping one so that it crops, so that it fits, or increasing the other one so that they fit, and then cropping it to match whatever needs to be matched. Questions? Any questions so far? All right. So the next thing that I want to do with this is that we want to duplicate a slide and then make it become the ending slide. Because we have a title slide, we have some middle slides, and then we want to have a concluding slide. Because the basic idea of a PowerPoint is it's like, a 5-page paper. You have your introductory statement, you have your body, and in your body you put in the things that you're going to prove, and then your conclusion where you summarize what you said. Same thing in a PowerPoint. In a PowerPoint, you have an introductory slide where you talk about what we're going to talk about, and then we prove it, and then we want to conclude it. So to conclude this, we're going to copy slide number 1 and make a duplicate. So you have a bajillion different ways of making a duplicate. One way to make a duplicate is you can literally copy and paste the slide. So one way to do it is in my slide sorter view or in my normal view, but being on my slide, I can select the slide I want to copy. I can do a Control-C to copy, or on a Mac, a Command-C to copy, and then a Control-V or a Command-V to paste. That's one way I can copy a slide. Another way I can copy a slide, Control-C, Control-V. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is that I can right-click my slide and I can choose duplicate slide. That will also create a duplicate. Another way to do it is that I can hold down the Alt key and click and drag, or is it Control key? Maybe it's Control key. Control key and click and drag and make a duplicate in that way. I can also, if I right click, I can do the copy and then the right click and then do paste. There's lots and lots and lots of different ways that you can make a duplicate. I can also go on new slide and I can go down to duplicate selected slides. Like I said, tons of different ways of duplicating a slide. Yet another way of doing it is I could just create a new slide. And then in the new slide, if I make the layout be blank, I could then go to the original, select all, copy, go to the new slide and paste, and that would also copy and paste and make a new slide. Lots of different ways of making a duplicate. So it doesn't matter which method you choose a method to copy your slide, and then make a duplicate of the slide. And then what we want to do is we want to take that duplicate and we want to move the duplicate to the very end. So to move it, you can just click and drag it down to the end. And it will move it down to the end. Another way that you could do the same thing is on view. Instead of being in the normal view, if you're in the slide sorter view, the slide sorter view makes it slightly easier to move slides around. Basically, the normal view is the slide sorter view on the left-hand side and the content view on the right-hand side. And if you tick the box that says notes, or click on the notes, the notes would be down at the bottom, which is what the notes page allows you to have, is the notes. I'm sorry? It's on view, on view. So if I'm on normal view, I can then put in and show the notes. All right. And again, if I want to get rid of the notes, I can uncheck where it says show notes. I could then uncheck where it shows notes. Or if I want to show the notes, show the notes. All right, so on slide number 5, what they want us to do is they want us to change this from saying healthy hydration to saying be healthy. So to change this from saying healthy hydration to saying be healthy, we want to first of all get rid of the word hydration. So if you double click a word, it selects it, and then you can press delete on your keyboard. And then before the word healthy, I can type in the word be. And again, if I wanted to do the keyboard shortcut, I could do the home key to make it go to the first line. You may recall that in Word, you could do home to go to the first line, end to go to the end. Same thing in PowerPoint. all of the cool keyboard things that you can do in Word, you can do in PowerPoint. The next thing they want us to do is they want us to get rid of while exercising. And they want this to say drink water instead of drinking water. So that our concluding slide will say, be healthy, drink water. All right, so if I save this, and I want to check to see how this is going to look when I give my presentation, what I can do is I can click on the slideshow view, which is down here in the lower right-hand corner. Allows me to do my presentation. And when I go into my presentation mode, there are a couple of things that I want to point out. First of all, when I go from this slide to the next, whoops, when I go from, I want to start at 1, I meant. So if I start at the beginning, we have this slide, and then slide 2 is this, and then slide 3 is this, and then slide 4 is this, and slide 5 is this. Couple of problems. Problem number 1 is that on slide 2, this violates the rule that I was talking about before, which is that there's way too many words on the screen all at once. So it's okay to have 3 to 5, at most 7 words on any one bullet point. But if you have more than 3 to 5, at most 7 words on any one bullet point, don't show the rest of the bullet points until your audience is ready for you to be at that point. So by saying cushions and protects vital organs, people are going to be reading about muscle fatigue and heat stroke. And like I said, when we were talking about bad PowerPointing, that audience members will hear their own voice and not listen to your voice. So showing everything all at once is a bad idea. The other problem that I have with this is that when we're going from one slide to the next slide to the next slide, it's just going zoom, 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 zoom. So there's a better way of doing it. And the better way of doing it is to do transitions. Now, I've mentioned this last time, but I'm going to emphasize it again. Almost all transitions are awful. Some transitions are just absolutely terrible, and other transitions are just sort of bad, but not horribly bad. There are basically 2 that are good. And the ones that are good are fade and what is it? Transition of fade and transition of reveal. Fade and reveal are pretty good. Pretty much all the rest of them stink. And I'm going to show you why they are. So if I go and I choose fade and I say apply to all, then what happens is that when we go from slide 1, when we go from slide 1 to slide 2 to slide 3, it gracefully goes from one slide to the next slide. And this is nice and peaceful and useful and does not distract you while you're watching it. On the other hand, if you chose, please don't choose this. If you chose, say, glitter. Glitter's pretty darn good. If I do glitter, apply to all. We have glitter. And then I go to the next slide and we got glitter. And then we go to the next slide and we go to glitter. The problem with this slide is not that it doesn't look pretty. It absolutely looks pretty. That's its problem. The problem is that you're looking at it and saying, oh, I like that. That's pretty cool. I wonder how he did that. I should take a PowerPoint class so I can learn how to do that, and not listening to me talk about why water is so important. The point of a PowerPoint is not to show that you know how to use PowerPoint. The point of a PowerPoint is to help you give your talk. That is the point of the PowerPoint. Unless, of course, you're teaching people about PowerPoint, in which case then, okay, fine. But unless you are showing people how to use PowerPoint, you should not use, for example, glitter. Or another really bad one is, well, honeycomb is kind of bad for kind of the same reason. So if I do honeycomb and I apply it, you know, it has the honeycomb, and then it goes to the next slide, and it goes honeycomb to the next slide, so on. Another really bad one is, oh, this one's the worst. Let's see, here we go. Is it, I think it's airplane. It's either airplane or origami. I forget which one is worse. So we'll try airplane first. So we do apply to all, and go back to the first one, and we tell it to go. So there's the airplane, and then we go to the next slide. There's that one, and then there's that one, and then there's that one, there's that one. Yeah, I think it's origami is the worst. So we do origami, and we do apply to all, and we say, hey, here we go. Yep, there he is. Yeah, origami is the worst. So you got the little origami guy floating on. Then you got the little origami guy. And I mean, this is cool. I mean, absolutely, this is nifty. But what the heck does this have to do with drinking water? Nothing. Again, the point of a PowerPoint should not be to wow your audience, to show your awesome PowerPoint skills. The point of the PowerPoint is to make it so that your audience can understand the material that you want to be giving them. Ones that I think are not as good as Fade, but are not absolutely horrible. I think Ferris wheel is kind of okay. Conveyor is kind of okay. Rotate is kind of okay. So rotate, for example, is this. So if I go in and we have rotate, and then the next slide, it rotates kind of like on a box going, it's kind of okay. It's not very distracting. The point is, the closer to boring that you get, the better it is. More boring is the right answer, because the point of a PowerPoint is not to show how cool you are. The point of a PowerPoint is to show how cool your talk is. Now, obviously, if your talk is boring, well, then you might want to, you know, do something like origami, because then, you know, it might make your talk actually, yeah. But, or alternatively, if you wanted to save origami for, like, you know, the surprise ending thing, that might be an okay. The point is, most, you know, fracture, for example, please don't use fracture in real life. This is fracture. Yeah. Going in reverse is kind of fun, but, you know, fracture is a bad choice. Dissolve is fine. Dissolve is actually pretty good. Dissolve and fade and reveal, those are all pretty good. Uncover, which one is uncover? Uncover is kind of okay. So the problem with uncover, I don't really have a problem so much with uncover, except that what uncover does is, oops, let me go ahead and choose uncover and then apply to all. What uncover does is that it slides it to the left. And I mean, I mean, it's okay. It's an okay choice. Drape, however, and curtains are really bad. So curtains, for example, is this. And then you go to the next slide and it does curtains. It moves to the side. And it goes and it does curtains. And again, this is cool, but that's not the point. The point should be, you know, drink water more effectively. That should be the point. So I usually use fade.
Yeah.
Fade is nice and boring, but fade is, you know, fade just goes, softly goes from one slide to the next.
When you select fade, then how can you apply?
You click on to apply to all.
Or in which in home?
No, in transitions.
Transition.
Transitions. Related to transitions are animations. And the only slide really that I think absolutely requires a animation is slide number 2. So in slide number 2, we have cushions and protects organs, transports, regulates, dehydrated body can't cool itself, can cause muscle fatigue. Each one of those is right at that maximum amount of words that you should have per bullet point. And that being the case, everything in it should be animated. And again, most of the animations are awful, 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 and you should not use. The ones that are good are, again, fade and appear. And that's about it. Fade and appear are good. Object color is kind of okay because it allows you to change the color as you're going from one thing to the next, but still I think appear is a better choice. Pretty much the rest of them all stink. And I'll show you why. First of all, I'll show you why fade is good. So if I change this to fade, the other thing is that when you create an animation, you'll notice that there are numbers that are associated with the animation. This is referring to which item is going to occur first, which item is going to occur second and third, and so on. And this is based on your mouse click or you're pressing the space bar. And to modify this, there is, in animations, there is a button over here called the animation pane. And when you open up the animation pane, it's showing you what is going to happen when. Most of the time, I think it's a bad idea to group things together, and you should do each thing one at a time, unless you really want to group things together. For example, you might want to group a picture with a particular sentence. So to change this over here, I'm going to click on this drop-down menu. I'm going to choose Start with Click, or Start on Click rather. And what that's going to do is that's going to mean that instead of it being these two being together and these three being together, it's going to be this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one. So that when I go and I give my presentation, so when I'm in slideshow view, it starts off with nothing. And then when I hit the space bar, cushions and protects vital organs. And then when I hit the space bar again, transports nutrients and oxygen to cells. And the reason is that I might want to talk about this for a few minutes. Talk about why it's important to allow, nutrients and oxygen to be transported to the cells and stuff. And then I might want to talk about why regulating your body temperature is important and how this can help you survive and all of that kind of stuff. And then remind you that dehydrated bodies can't cool itself. So you need to drink water to cool yourself down and stuff. And if you don't drink water, you'll get muscle fatigue and heat stroke, and drinking water helps prevent that from happening. That kind of stuff happens by animating the bullet points. So fade, like I said, is good. So let me show you again the different what fade does. You'll notice again, fade slowly fades in based on me hitting the space bar. If I change this to appear, appear is my other favorite. I say, if I choose appear, what appear does is appear, instead of it slowly fading in, it just appears. Boom, 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 boom. You have to add sound effects. What this is, appear is the digital equivalent of the overhead projector. So anybody who is my age or older will remember that back in the dark ages, before we had projectors for computers and stuff, we used to take our content and we would put them on pieces of plastic, or in really ancient times, pieces of glass. And you would then write on the plastic. And then what you would do is you would take a regular piece of paper and you would hide the stuff that you wanted to hide with the regular piece of paper. And then when you wanted to make it appear, you would move the regular piece of paper down so that you could then, hide the stuff from the students before they would see the stuff that you wanted. That's what appear is. Appear is the digital equivalent of using a piece of paper on the overhead projector. All right. One of the things that I'll mention in a few minutes when I show you my talk on Prezi is that the overhead projector was invented in the mid to late 1800s. It was like 1880 something or another was when it was invented. And what they originally did was they used to use candles underneath the glass, and then it projected it with the mirror, because same thing, like this guy has a little mirror, and the mirror then would take that lighted material up and it would be projected out. Essentially, we have not changed the way that we give presentations in about 100 years, a little over 100 years. It's just that now we're using PowerPoint to do it instead of overhead projectors. Yeah.
How do you change? How we have 1 through 5 right there?
Yeah.
Little squares. How do you change it? Because mine has 1, 1, 2, 2.
Yeah. So again, to change that, you want to click onto the animation pane so that the animation pane appears. Once the animation pane appears, you want to make sure that you want to select all of them. So you can, if you do a Control A or a Command A, it'll select all. And then on the little black drop-down menu, so like on here, it's on number 5, this little black drop-down menu, you want to choose Start on Click. And if you choose Start on Click, and everything is selected, then it will change it to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the other hand, what if I wanted to make it so that 1 and 2 are together? If I wanted to make 1 and 2 be together, I would go on to 2. And when I click on to 2, I click on the drop-down menu and I would say Start with Previous. Start with Previous means start it with the previous one. So now that I've done that, 1 and 1 will happen at the initial. So if I go in on my
on my slideshow view,
it will appear, the first two will appear at once.
now generally I don't recommend doing that for text, but I might want to do that if I had a picture. So I might want to make it so that I might want to add this picture to being one of the things that appears. And so what I could do is I could say that I want picture number 6 to appear with with content number 1. So I'll say start with previous. So that now what happens is that
It starts off like this, and then when I hit the space bar, we get cushions and protects with the picture.
If I have it like on the right hand,
Mhm.
I have it 1 to 5, but on my picture it's still 2, 1, 3. But on the square it says 1 to 5.
I would check to see if it really is. So click on the slideshow view. And when you click on the slideshow view, check to see if it's really going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or if it's, it may just be a memory issue that it hadn't copied it over really yet or something. One last thing I'll show you about this is that sometimes you don't want it to go in order. It's entirely possible that you want to do cushions and protects vital organs and then cause muscle fatigue. I don't know why you would, but it's entirely possible that you might. If I wanted to do that, the way that I would do that is I would move my causing muscle fatigue up to being in between what used to be 1 and 2, and this will then become the new 2. So it'll do cushions and protects, and then can cause muscle fatigue, and then transports. So that if I run this, cushions and protects can cause muscle fatigue. On this slide, it's entirely possible that you might want this part to happen before this part. It just depends on the talk itself. It depends on what the voiceover that you want to have on this slide. If you wanted to say, look at the difference between the man on the right and the woman on the left. Well, then obviously you'd want to have both pictures appear at the same time. On the other hand, if you wanted to say, before you start exercising, make sure you drink a whole bunch of water, but limit it to around 10 ounces for every 20 minutes that you're planning to, whatever. And then you want to say afterwards, don't forget after you're done exercising to drink water. Then you might want to have picture 1 animated before picture 2 is animated. But if you, in your voiceover, are comparing the 2, well, then you would not want to animate them. So it all depends on the talk itself. Because again, going back to what I said before, the whole point of a PowerPoint is to enhance your talk. That's why you're doing the PowerPoint. Questions? Yes.
So for this presentation, if I give the design ideas and my layout doesn't look exactly like this, are you going to stop?
It depends on what you're doing. Probably not.
I mean, because if you click on the slides and it gives you the design ideas, they all fairly looks okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because in the design ideas, they already crop and proportionate the pictures versus the text.
Mm-hmm.
And also sometimes gives you, sometimes they also give you the little clip art pictures related to the slides. like I noticed that when I was doing, looking at the design ideas, it gave a little picture of the heart of
Mhm.
what it does if you don't drink enough water. So it looked pretty cool. So can I use that?
Yes. All right. Any other questions about this? All right. So at this point, then I am all done with my part 1. So I want to save it and then turn it in. What I think we'll do now is we'll take a little bit of a break. When we come back from the break, I want to show you Prezi and what Prezi is and why Prezi might be a good alternative to PowerPoint and why you might want to use that. And then that'll be the end of the stuff that we'll do today. And then next week, like I said, we'll do the Thanksgiving session or the Thanksgiving presentation, and then it'll be time for people to start doing their final presentations. Yes.
The instructions for the Thanksgiving one, they're not in any of these, right? You're gonna go over.
No, they are. It's the Thanksgiving one is on assignment. It's called like assignment class 2, presentations class 2.
Guessing it's in,
So it's right here.
I mean, in the,
No, it's not in the book at all.
okay, that's what,
It's not in the book at all.
got it, okay.
But it's referring to things that are in the book. So that'll be the stuff that we do next week. All right, so like I said, let's go ahead and take a little bit of a break. And when we come back, I'm going to show you about Prezi, and then that'll be the end of the stuff that we'll do tonight.